Josh, we are good to go now.
Good afternoon. I'm Josh Sun with the Department of Planning and Development. Welcome to the March 9th, 2022 meeting of the Committee on Design. First, some housekeeping. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the DPD's YouTube page. If you're a part of an applicant team presenting today, please hit the raise hand button on Zoom and we will make sure you are a Zoom panelist. Second, I would like to introduce John Law. John has recently joined DPD as an assistant commissioner and will focus on various design excellence initiatives, including the Committee on Design. We will co-host April's COD meeting with him taking the helm by May. As I roll off, I'd like to sincerely thank you all for your patience and active participation as we started and will continue to improve this new committee. I truly believe John will be a huge asset in taking this committee to the next level. John brings over 15 years of experience in urban design, with most of his career spent at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. His work here in Chicago and around the world is focused on creating thriving and sustainable urban places and emphasizing the role that design plays in building strong, equitable communities. John, would you like to say anything?
Sure. Thank you, Josh. I just want to say I'm really excited to be here. I do feel strongly about the importance of design excellence in all of our neighborhoods, and I'm looking forward to help advance those efforts across the city. I also want to commend Commissioner Cox for convening this great group of experts. I really think this is a great way to promote open design discourse and ensure that we're getting the best project outcomes for all of our communities. It's great to see a few familiar faces in the group, and I'm thrilled to be working with you all. So I know that getting this process off the ground, as Josh said, has been no small feat in the past 9 months. So I do want to acknowledge the great work that Josh and Paula Garcia and others have done to get us here to this point. We really appreciate it. And as you said, we'll continue to sort of refine and enhance this work. So you'll begin to see more in the coming months. But for now, thank you, Josh, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, John. So back to business. To our esteemed committee, thank you for volunteering your time to be a part of this advisory group. To the members of the public who are joining us, what you will see today and at future Committee on Design meetings are projects currently under review by DPD staff. The committee is a voluntary advisory body of design professionals that provide their expertise on design issues. This committee is not a substitute for Plan Commission, as it is not a forum for public debate, nor is the advice of the committee legally binding. It is the hope that today's discourse will lead to recommendations that will elevate the design excellence of the city of Chicago. These recommendations will be forwarded to DPD staff for consideration as they review these projects for Plan Commission and subsequent approvals. I will now move on to roll call.
Well, we know what he wants to agree to.
One second. All right, please state present or here if you are in attendance. Sarah Beardsley.
Present.
Reed Kroloff.
Present.
Brian Lee.
Here.
Juan Moreno.
Present.
John Ronan.
Here.
Ann Thompson.
Here.
Leslie Roth.
Here.
Anna Ishikawa.
Here.
Bob Faust. Racolda Reyes. All right.
And then Josh, just for the records, Renaud is here, but will be recusing himself.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yep. Present.
Leslie is here. I think that Leslie has been promoted. All right. So to members of the public, you are welcome to begin dropping comments and questions into the Q&A box. Committee members are invited to review this information during and after each presentation and incorporate the comments into the discussion. We will not be reviewing questions or comments from the public individually. To the applicant teams, please clearly state your name and your relation to the project prior to speaking. You have 20 minutes to present your proposal. Committee members, please hold your comments and questions until after each presentation. We will now move to the first item on the agenda. 301 East 43rd Street or 43 Green, Phase 2. 43 Green is a transit-oriented development, or TOD, comprised of a multi-phase mixed-use residential and commercial project anchored by the 43rd Street Green Line Station. Phase 2 of the development is a 78-unit residential building adjacent to the 43rd Street Green Line Station. The project design intends to be similar in approach to TOD developments on the north side of Chicago with smaller, highly efficient apartments and reduced surface parking. Please proceed with the presentation and state your name prior to speaking. Thank you.
Really quickly, Josh, before the team commences, just to my fellow committee members, because this project is a Moody Nolan project, I will be formally recusing myself from deliberation. So.
Okay, do you have any, shall I start, Josh?
Yes, please begin. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Head. I'm Vice President for Affordable Development with the Habitat Company. Here today with our team, Landon Bonebaker Design and Moody Nolan Design, as well as our partner P3 Development, led by Philip Beckham, who will be speaking as well. I will just give a quick overview on the project. Let Phil talk for a second just about his relationship to the site and the project concept, and then we'll take you through the design. 43 Green Phase 2 is the second phase of a project that was started about 2.5 years ago at 43rd Street adjacent to the Green Line. 43rd Street Phase 1 began construction in December of 2021 and will provide 100 new mixed income units as well as ground floor retail immediately adjacent to the 43rd Street Green Line. 43 Green Phase 2, and you'll see all the site locations and so forth in a minute, is on the opposite side of the Green Line from Phase 1. It's a 78-unit residential development, and this project is roughly 50% affordable, 50% market rate. It's part of a $100 million plus investment along the 43rd Street corridor near the 43rd Street Green Line. It's a project that came together through discussions between P3 and Habitat that really focused on a handful of issues. One was to create new market rate units while also preserving long-term affordability in the community. It was intended to leverage new investment along the 43rd Street corridor, and it was intended to be a transit-oriented development of the sort that's more commonly seen along the Milwaukee corridor or other locations on the north side of Chicago. We were intentional in designing the spaces, the apartments, and the building with ground floor retail to track with the kinds of developments you're seeing on the north side and promote new investment and growth along the 43rd Street corridor and Greater Bronzeville in general. The market units will be targeted to city workers, young professionals, teachers and public employees. The affordable units, like other affordable units, are designed to preserve long-term affordability in the community. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Phil Beckham to just talk a little bit about his vision and how the project came together.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't know who's controlling the deck. If you can move on to the next decks. Keep going. That was one more. Thank you. Again, Jeff, thank you. My name is Phil Beckham from P3 Markets. I'm one of the managing partners along with my business partner, Juan Saldana. And as Jeff said, we are a JV partner with the Habitat Company. And again, this is what 43 Green is more than just a development for this neighborhood, but it's a history-making development, and some people call it visionary, but the main thing about this development is it continues the strive to what the city and the aldermen want to do is start up revitalize a new retail corridor, repopulate an area that has been strewn with vacant lots for over 25 years. And this is phase one was a beginning, and phase two is a continuation of that development and revitalization of a very historic Black neighborhood surrounded, and this is surrounding the 43rd Street Green Line. Again, it's a lot of history that goes on into this, but the neighborhood, the community has been excited about this since we broke ground, and they're excited for the continuation. Again, this is not just a development, but for me, it's personal. That is, I'm the third generation of Brownsville neighborhood. That's my dad kneeling in front of his dad, my grandfather's truck at the intersection of 43rd and Prairie in 1955, which is directly across on the same street as a phase two. So again, this is much more than just a development project. And I really appreciate the committee, this new committee that looks at how this fits in a neighborhood like Brownsville and how it brings vibrancy and how it connects with the community. I'd like to pass it on to, I think, Jennifer is next, or Jeff?
Yeah, Phil.
Thanks.
Next slide, please. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Bone. I'm with Land & Bone Baker Architects. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Phil, for the intro. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to the committee for coming here today to watch this presentation. We're pretty excited about this project. I just want to start off with a little bit of the design team background. Like Jeff was saying, we've been involved on the planning end since 2019. And Land & Bone Baker is the architect for phase one that's under construction right at the moment. Phase two, we've expanded the design team to include Moody Nolan and Beehive Architects, and we're super excited about that expansion. I think we wanted to really bring some variety to the design expression along the corridor, and we're excited to be working with them both. The basic roles, Land & Bone Baker is going to continue on in the planning aspect and also the interior of the second phase project. Moody Nolan is going to basically be responsible for the skin, the core, and the shell of the building. They've been working on the massing, which they'll show down the road. And I'm going to be sharing this presentation with Miguel Gonzalez of Moody Nolan. We've also got a very strong consultant team, as you can see, lined up at the bottom. Next slide, please. Starting with community concerns, and I'm not even sure concerns is the right word. It's really the goals and desires of the community. And I think Jeff hit it right off the bat. I mean, the idea is to really reinvigorate 43rd Street, the corridor. The first point, mixed income affordable development. We have 78 units. The phase two building is on the right-hand side. The phase one building, which is under construction, is on the left-hand side. And with roughly about a 50-50 mix of affordable and market rate. On both projects, phase one and phase two, we've got activated retail along 43rd Street on the ground floor, continuous from Calumet all the way to the west to Prairie, which we're pretty excited about as well. In phase one, there's a coffee shop planned, a dry cleaner, and some kind of food service. And in the phase 2, we've got a couple retail spaces that is they're in progress in terms of what's going to be in there, but total activation along 43rd Street. Respecting existing neighborhood buildings, I think we were very sensitive, and we'll see this as we get into some of the massing, to really have the frontage along 43rd Street. And as we step back to the south and turn the corner, as we define the urban edges, things start to step down and kind of relate to the neighborhood a little bit in material and scale. So we've been super sensitive about that. And that's some of the feedback that we've gotten from the aldermen and different community members. And then also high quality and reasonably priced apartments, again, 50-50 affordable and a market rate. When both of these phases are done, we're going to have 177 new residential units to add on 43rd Street, and really connecting. Both of these projects are connected right to the Green Line stop, heading right downtown. So it's, wonderful access for the residents as well. Next slide. This is just our walkability, and just to orientate everybody with where the project is. On the left-hand side of the Green Line stop, right in the middle, is the current site. Just over the tracks to the east is phase 1 that's happening right now. As you can see, there's amenities in the neighborhood. There's good transportation. There's some churches, educational facilities, and a little bit of retail. There's also a lot of vacant lots and a lot of open spaces. And I think these two projects are really going to start to work on filling some of those open spaces and reconnecting the neighborhood. There's a lot of development happening on Prairie and Calumet, north of 43rd Street, a lot of infill development. A lot of activity, a lot of new construction activity as well. But I think that it's a really wonderful location. We're pretty well connected. I mean, it's a short divvy ride to the lakefront from here. A lot of positives.
We are about halfway through the presentation time. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and speed up. Next slide. We've also paid attention to the historical significance of the neighborhood, culturally and architecturally. The Forum is right across the street from phase 1. So a lot of really cool buildings, a lot of historic buildings, and they're very modern and very traditional. Lot great textures, colors that we were paying attention to as we were designing these 2 phases. Next slide. The immediate context is right across the street, the top left. There's some single-story commercial buildings, the top 2 images. The L station is right there. Again, it's a real presence. CTA has plans to rehab and do some improvements at the station in the next couple of years, so we're looking forward to that. The center image, there's some new townhomes that were built right across from phase 1 in the last couple of years. And the last slide on the far right is really an example of some of the residential fabric, 2-story brick, traditional Chicago townhomes that are kind of scattered in and out of the neighborhood. Next slide. We've also looked at precedence for height. So phase 1 is a 10-story building. Phase 2 is also a 10-story building. We wanted to make sure that we were kind of in context from a height point of view. And there's many examples kind of nearby and further north along MLK. The Belmont Flats is right at the corner of 43rd and MLK. It's a 9-story building. It's a really cool historic building. And going further north, Paul Stewart apartments are up to 18 stories. And there's also some 8 and 9-story buildings sprinkled within the neighborhood just north of our sites. Next slide. This is just a high-level urban drawing just to show the relationship between the 2 phases. Phase 2 is on the left-hand side, kind of bisected by the CTA Green Line. To the east is phase 1. Both buildings turn the corners, define the urban edge, and wrap around on Prairie and Calumet streets. Next slide. The ground floors As I was saying, basically retail is fronting 43rd Street on both phases. As the buildings wrap the corners, they turn more residential. The residential lobbies on phase 2 are on Prairie, halfway down, and on Calumet, halfway down as well. We've tucked parking behind the buildings and really tried to hold the edge on 43rd and the 2 side streets. Next slide. So basically our role, the latest round of low-income housing tax credit, the city round, was last summer. So this was a sheet from our initial conceptual massing studies that we did, our firm. This was prior to Moody Nolan getting involved. From this point on, Moody Nolan took over with massing studies, but I just wanted to show some of the early concepts. Again, we were given the program 10 stories. We needed to be about 78 units. So we were looking at 3 different options. One was really what we call the east-west bar, facing 43rd Street, coming around the corner onto Prairie, setting back and creating this entry forecourt that was landscaped. This one was a little tough. It was putting a lot of residential units near the L. The second one was taking the biggest mass and going north-south along Prairie. This one really put most of the building on Prairie, which we were not, just given the context and the stepping down, meeting the residential area to the north or the south, is we didn't want to do that. So the preferred scheme was the third one, the far one on the right, which was really a terrace scheme that was sensitive to the context, the neighboring context on Prairie. It stepped down, but also had a lot of the bulk on 43rd, and we thought it turned the corner well. The middle was a little heavy. I think this was a concept, but we started here. I'm going to hand it over to Miguel to continue.
Thanks. We have about 5 minutes left also.
Hi, everyone. This is Miguel Gonzalez at Moody Nolan. I'll try to be brief as I go through these. Next slide, please, with the remaining time that we have. I wanted to mention, just kind of give you an idea how we arrived to where we are today. We looked at a series of iterations of the massing. This first one is looking at really a lower scale building at 8 stories that tried to hug the street corner, step back the retail level to create this more generous sidewalk, activate that sidewalk. As you can see, it was kind of out of context, even though we tried to lower the scale of the building. Next slide, please. And I apologize because the site plans on these are flipped. So this site plan you're seeing here belongs to the last slide. The second option here that we study that we did really started to look at a taller building, which allowed us a little more articulation along the facade, as well as really stepping back from the neighboring house on Prairie Street. One of the challenges here was the parking, one, which was visible from the street, and 2, the significant number of units that were exposed or next to the CTA line. Third, next slide, please. So this is our current proposed design, which you can start to see. We are looking at a 10-story building, 106 feet. Again, this is no taller than phase 1. We're trying to create kind of a bookend condition along the CTA. So the massing kind of steps down along the green line, and then again starts to step down along Prairie, and more so as it carries south towards the neighborhood. We made an effort really to also step back that retail to create a more walkable, active sidewalk along both streets. And then really paying attention to the corner, differentiating that corner massing wise to emphasize, this kind of coming together of the more retail oriented street with the more neighborhood oriented street. You can start to see that we've tried to employ some strategies here as far as screening the parking lot. There's some opportunities here to create some a dog park, for example, on this first floor level, as well as creating some landscaped kind of terminal views from the street into the garage by way of trees and greenery. We've also tried to provide, again, ample space at the sidewalk. You can see some ideas here for setting tables and chairs along the retail along 43rd here to reinforce this kind of trying to reestablish this retail corridor. Next slide, please. And again, just looking at a little larger version of what I was just discussing. We are currently in talks with CTA. So All this is very early on in the process, but we're looking at having access to the loading and trash pickup from the CTA side, from the alley. Next slide. And again, here, just looking at a kind of a rough programmatic massing diagram showing the allocation of units on the building. Looking at that generous sidewalk we've tried to establish along Prairie, as well as how the building steps down. Starting to look at where the residential entry is on Prairie, which is the more neighborhood-oriented street. Next slide, please. And then looking at a diagram that really looks at some of the features of the building in relation to, these urban design, kind of large-scale urban design moves. So starting with the building massing, really we're taking cues from phase one. Again, we're no taller than that phase one as far as that 10-story height. And then the building starts stepping down along Prairie. And then that retail along the bottom floor really starting to pick up on the scale of the lower scale houses along Prairie, as well as stepping back to allow this generous sidewalk and try to activate this sidewalk to be more walkable and vibrant. The massing itself as well, we've tried to modulate above that first floor as it steps in and out to provide some interest and modulation along both streets. We have a 7-story terrace where the building steps down, which will provide some flexible outdoor uses to the residents, as well as nice kind of southern orientation. And then we've also used balconies as a kind of a massing strategy to really erode at these corners, create a more dematerialized condition where also we provide views. For example, the corner at 43rd and Prairie really is a fantastic view of downtown towards the north. Next slide, please.
We take the last or the next minute or so to wrap up.
Thank you. Some precedents we've looked at in terms of patterning, modulating windows, materials, and so on. Next slide. And finally, I'd like to really kind of show you where we are with the design. Again, this is early in the process, but really we're looking at some very durable, low maintenance materials such as brick, glass fiber reinforced concrete panels, and then some accents of metal fascias and so on. This corner at 43rd and Prairie, really looking at dematerializing that corner with a little more glass. The balconies again. You can see the rooftop amenity here on the upper left, and at the lower left, the residential entry. You can also see the activation of the sidewalk along the retail. We've tried to use color strategically throughout the building to really, bring out the life in the building. And there's also some opportunities for public art, which you can start to see on the lower right side corner here. Next slide, please. Again, more of a street level view. Also looking at the tree-lined Prairie Street, which we've tried to sort of carry through this idea of the landscaping and the open space at the pedestrian level. Next slide. View from the CTA line. Next slide, please. And really looking at this kind of bookended condition between phase one and phase two again, phase two being here on the right. Next slide. And really, this is a view from Prairie Street looking north. So I think we have a little better view here of that public art opportunity. Again, the location of the building entry for the residents and the terrace above the lower scale of the building as it steps down towards Prairie. Next slide, please. Again, another street level view. Next. And a little closer just to appreciate the detail of the textures of the materials. Next slide, please. And then a close-up of our facade, looking at some of the proposed panels and the brick along the CTA line, the modulation of the windows between masses, establishing a rhythm and modulation along both streets. Next slide. And then finally, kind of a further away view from the north, looking at the kind of corner view of our building here. Next slide, please. And then we have some plans here, and I think this is probably about the end of our presentation based on the time that we have left. So I appreciate the time and thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Committee members, please take a moment to review any, sorry, hold on one second. Yes, please take a moment to review any comments received from the public. It doesn't look like there are any. And if there were comments, we would incorporate them however we saw fit into the discussion. The floor is now yours for comments and questions to the applicant. Please raise your Zoom hand and we will call on you. If you are having issues with not having a Zoom hand, I believe you have my email address and I will keep tabs on that as well. And perhaps we could
That we highlighted an issue and then.
keep the screen up or
Well.
let me see.
Design meeting.
Okay, I think we're good. So yeah, the floor is yours, committee members, if you'd like to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Josh, are you looking for questions or comments?
I believe both. Well, John Ronan has his hand up, so questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, John.
Yeah, I guess I could start by asking, in Chicago, it's typical that the building on the corner is not set back from the street to align with the houses. Very often, the corner building is a lot line building, property line to property line, and then as you get into the block, the front setbacks for the residential building start. So I'm wondering what drove the decision to set back so far on Prairie Avenue.
I can take that question, John. We really tried to maintain that street edge at the upper volume where the building is read from second floor on up, especially at the corner. So that's really built up to the building line. And then we're essentially setting back the first floor at Prairie really to allow that kind of larger experience, a little more open space. I think that was part of the idea, to really try to create a little more open space into the residential entry. And obviously this is very early on in the process, so we haven't developed fully that idea or the landscaping itself. But that was the idea there, as far as holding it at the upper levels and then stepping back really more dramatically. And I think we're stepping back maybe 6 feet along Prairie as opposed to the 10 feet that we're stepping back along 43rd.
All right. Thank you. I believe Leslie, you are next.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. There's so many things about this building that I really appreciate. And I think the thoughtfulness of your approach shows with the balconies. I like the building setbacks. I like the rear parking. I think that was an important decision to make. And the residential entry at Prairie, I thought was also a really important decision to make. A couple comments and questions that I had. I didn't hear anything in the presentation about incorporation of sustainable strategies. You've gone through, a pretty rigorous process of understanding the massing and height analysis. I heard that mentioned several times. I think, I'm very comfortable with the height and the massing and density of the building, but looking at Chicago's ETOD ordinance, I wondered if and seeing this opportunity for equitable development, I wondered if there were any other sustainable strategies that you incorporated. Have you accommodated shared ride or, specific loading zones considering, a sustainable future? Have you considered materials for the buildings that do, that have some sustainable value? Also wondering if there's any, bike parking or special, have you talked to Divvy? Have you talked to the CTA about any kind of ride share? And so that's one piece of sustainable strategies. My second question is about, what do you mean when you say affordable? So thinking about, what the AMI is, what the demographic composition is, of folks that'll be attracted to this building? I heard you say professionals, I heard you say civic workers. I'm wondering about families with kids, what amenities there are for families. What about folks who want to age in place? Have you considered any of those pieces? So, and 50% market rate, also just kind of wondering where you think the price points are and if this building is able to accommodate a full life cycle. So those are my two questions, sustainability and demographic life cycle. Thank you.
I can take the second question first, and then we can talk to the architects on the specifics related to sustainability. But the affordable units are tax credit affordable units available to families up to 60% of AMI. This is not targeted to be sort of a larger family building as much as it is a studios 1s and 2s. This building is really modeled after similar buildings on the north side. We do have other developments that we work on that have a broader range, but this was really targeted at trying to be sort of an economic catalyst in the community. In terms of affordability range, we would contemplate sort of a life cycle type of a scenario. Certainly, it's open to folks of any age. We also really accommodate sort of career growth in this building with the affordable units that are available to somebody who might be starting their career or ending their career working part-time, and ultimately moving into more of a market rate scenario. So that's probably as much as I can cover in quickly, but I appreciate your questions. I think that they're generally in line with some of the thinking that we have with our development. Jeff, or
I was going to piggyback off that, Jeff. This is Phil Beckham. One thing that you asked about sustainability, directly across on this picture, directly across the street, there are divvy bikes. There's a divvy bike system already set up. It's been there for about 3 years. And on the Prairie side, we'll have, just as we do on the Calumet side, cut out for loading, unloading for shared ride and residents. And now to talk about the housing, this was really talked about for a long time about we would lose our younger population to the South Loop, to West Loop, to the North Side, because number one, there were no apartments that they could afford, and number two, there were no amenities. I have those children that are in the 25, 30 years old. So this was mainly to keep them here, keep us from losing our Brownsville youth, and give them options. And this is the way we looked at it. Some of those kids are coming for that, like Jeff said, their first job with debt, college debt and credit issues. And this gives them an opportunity to stay in their neighborhood. And then with the new infill infill building that's going on in the neighborhood, they could actually stay here. And as they grow financially, maybe they could leave our apartment building, but stay in the neighborhood. And that was the whole context of why we were doing what we're doing and how we did it.
Thank you. I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I could speak real quickly to some of the sustainability. Thanks for your questions, Leslie. The DPD sustainable matrix, we're following that, and I think we're getting most of our points with the enterprise green communities metric, and I think it's really great metric for affordable and market rate housing, just in terms of the goals with that. And we're also, I mean, obviously it's a transit served location, which is pretty huge. We do have a bike room. I don't know the exact number of bikes, but we've got an on-site bike storage and bike room, as well as the divvy bikes that Phil was talking about. So that's basically the kind of general sustainability approach.
We are about halfway through the public comment session. I believe Reed Kroloff is next. Reed, are you able to talk?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. And sorry about all the mess on this. I just have a quick question to the architects about why you think you need to articulate this building as several smaller buildings, as 3 completely different cladding systems, and what is a relatively small building.
Well, again, I think part of it is trying to really modulate between these two kind of scales as we see it, this retail corridor that we're trying to reestablish between phase 1, phase 2, and the more neighborhood-oriented scale of Prairie and the neighboring houses. Really, we tried to create a kind of a modulating facade. If we look at the window patternings, there's really 2 distinct window patternings that permeate throughout. And then the materials really start to talk about, like you're saying, sort of distinguishing between these discrete masses. And really, we were trying to create this idea of a corner, a presence, which is really what you see from a distance, especially coming from the north, from downtown. And then the building as seen from the south, from the neighborhood, let's say. And really trying to create a little more of a kind of scaled down building in that sense with the materiality changes, as you've pointed out. And it's really very similar materials and let's say texture and feel. We do have the masonry, the brick, which is more present at the retail level as well. It's a very tactile material. But then we have the glass reinforced, the GFRC panels, which do have a kind of textured appearance, very durable again. But the idea is that we do have this kind of, don't want to say masonry, but there's very kind of permanence to the look itself. Jeff, please jump in there if I've missed anything.
I was just going to say, I mean, to piggyback on your comments, Miguel, I think our approach was to try to have some sensitivity to the kind of mass and the feel of this building on the corner. And I think the way we ended up approaching it was to really articulate the different massing moves to kind of break down the scale and also give personality to the different components of the building as you kind of walk around from 43rd to Prairie. And I think there's consistency in the materials, but they're distributed in different ways. And I think that it's, it really helps to not have kind of a monolithic form that kind of wraps the corner. And I think we just felt, we spent a lot of time standing, looking at the site across the street and kind of in the local context. And this approach to us really felt like the right approach.
Thank you. Brian, you had your hand up before. Do you still have your hand up?
Yes. Can you hear me? A few comments and maybe a couple of questions. First, I think that obviously, I think everybody working in the Bronzeville neighborhood should be complimented for, attention to this kind of building type and density. So kudos for pursuing not only one building, but also 2 buildings. I appreciate the massing studies because it helps us see your path in terms of what you've explored and what you've thrown out and what you are proposing. And I actually agree. I think the height is appropriate. I think that vertical breakup of the massing in volume is appropriate also because it creates more rhythm. And I think that horizontal rhythm or horizontal dimension is often more times important than the vertical height. The stepping down, towards the train station as well as a neighborhood, I think it's successful. I think that the question that Reed asked is an interesting one because the plan is a double-loaded corridor, L shape, and it does have some steps that you could articulate as separate volumes, but it is a single building. So the issue of the different fenestration, colors, material, is something that, appears to be surface, but I think it works fairly well in terms of being reinforced by the offsets and conditions where you try to articulate those volumes and not just have it as surface treatment. I did have a question about the wide setback also, that, if it's required and something everybody likes, it does, increase the dimensions across the street and less about continuing the street wall. But it could be a very nice amenity. And so I encourage you guys to really look at that landscape condition to make it something that's very strong, almost as a portal to the residential neighborhood. The plans to me all look great. I think that you have some real experts in terms of how to get affordable housing to work, and yet also provide a significant amount of amenities that are not only programmatic in terms of community rooms and laundry rooms off of terraces, but also just a simple thing like light into a long corridor. I guess the question I had was, well, first it relates to noise from the L, the CTA station. Are you doing anything to mitigate that for those residential units? And then are there any lessons that you learned from phase one? And I know that it's under construction right now, but obviously cost issues they're always going to affect the design, and hopefully the ambitions here don't get cheapened or value engineered out. But any other kind of lessons that you've learned in the kind of process that informed this building?
Jeff, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can jump in. Brian, thanks so much for your thoughtful comments. I really appreciate that. To address the noise, I think that if you remember in the massing studies, we did look at a scheme that put more units on the tracks. We were really taking that one seriously because we liked the idea of a kind of a recessed, more of an entry court that was landscaped, but then kind of pulled that back to really define the urban edge and the street. So we've also, on a couple of the floors, put non-residential functions like laundry and storage on some of the windows and portions of the building of the L that is close to the train line. And I think that we went through a HUD noise study on phase one. And, given that the trains are really coming to a stop at the station at that point, the noise really turned out to be not that significant. I think more of an issue is, people are hanging out kind of on the platform looking around. So I think some issues of privacy are a concern as well. So we haven't really, other than, a normal wall construction, we're not doing triple glazing or anything like that. We're not doing anything special. I think the one, I'll just make a real quick comment about maybe a lesson learned. I mean, as we all know, every day is a new day these days with construction and costs. And I think that phase one, when we planned that building and designed it and then got it built, that's a precast. It's 100% precast building. That was the construction methodology that we were maybe initially thinking phase two was going to be. But things are, I think, from a couple of points of view. One is that we didn't want this building to look like phase one necessarily. I think that's the beauty of having this expanded team. So this building is going to be probably a cast in place frame, and it gives us a little more flexibility with materials and expression with massing and the facade. So I think one of the lessons was to, kind of explore other options for construction other than precast. And Miguel, I don't know if you want to jump in and add to that.
I think you covered the question very well, Jeff. Thank you. I would only add that as far as the CTA side units, most of the units are actually oriented north and south. So I think we will be able to minimize, noise transmission from that side. That's the only point I wanted to add to that.
Great, thank you. Given our time, maybe we'll just, we only have two other panel, members with questions, Juan and Hannah. So Juan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you, Josh. First and foremost, just commend you guys on the commitment. In particular, Phil, thanks for sharing your personal story, and I know how dedicated you are to the community, and it's just wonderful to see what you're doing. I just have some comments and just food for thought more than anything else. One, just to continue this dialogue about the exterior. One thing that works really well in the first building is really it's kind of two languages that come together, and I think it's successful. And you guys describe these as bookends. And I think it's great that you do have another partner to start looking at things, in a different light. But I do think that the exterior starts to get really busy as soon as you introduce the third material. And it almost starts to feel like this is just an examination of moments of ideas instead of cohesive ideas. So I just ask that you, revisit the notion of maybe dialing back from 3 to 2. The other is that and it might just be because of the views that you picked, but other than a note that says clearly defined entry, it's a residential building, but I've never felt like I really have this kind of dignity and clear path to entry. I know where it's at. It makes a lot of sense where it's at, but in what's been articulated, I don't get a sense that the entry is as celebrated as kind of this retail corner. And that just might be views that were picked. I get it, but it's like, I think other than one view, we really don't even get a sense of where the front door is. And I think that's something that's important as you start to think about that Prairie side, even as Brian talked about just, providing some kind of amenities there. I think there's a chance to even really rethink this entry piece. And then lastly, because the building is next to the green line, there's one piece of, designing for sound, as you guys have addressed wonderfully. But I'm just wondering, even like programmatically, as we think about buildings, that are next to the L, where the programs inside start to celebrate that they're next to an L. And whether that's your restaurant that can be a double height space right next to the L, so people on top of the L are actually looking into the restaurant, right, instead of units. Just if maybe it could have inspired your reprogramming a little bit. And that's it. I look, you guys do wonderful work. I just want to offer those up as suggestions, and you're to be commended. So thank you.
Hey, Juan, this is Jeff. Thanks for that. One thing that we were thinking about, which I don't think we had time to mention within the 20 minutes, is we were thinking about what happens under the L, and really thinking of like a low line type version thing that could be really cool. And maybe, like you were saying, I mean, some of the program space that happens on that corner kind of connect to that. So, that could be one possibility. Thanks for your thoughts.
Super, Jeff. Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks, Hannah. And then Sarah, did you have a question also?
Someone else mentioned the same thing.
Okay, cool. So Hannah will be our last commenter or questioner. Thanks.
Hi, team. Thank you so much for your presentation. Jeff, as always, I do love your kind of tapestry and use of color in your architecture. It is refreshing and nice to see, especially at the community level. A couple things that I had a question on, as well as some commentary, is that really looking at the landscape side, I do question the viability of these retail spaces. I think the most important thing when we're making such a large statement with retail is that these spaces are viable and that they don't remain empty, which would really be a detriment to the community, the residents of the community, building really. Especially because the main frontage is the retail. And I do kind of echo the comment that Juan just made in regards to the entrance. It is a little hidden from at least this view. I understand from Prairie side, it's a little bit different, but even I think in this, it's just, I think maybe it's the use of the color red. It just feels like it's almost a part of the retail space in lieu of something very special. I think the mural is a nice idea. I do question the location and kind of the smells that might come out of the dog park that's right adjacent and facing the street, and what that material would be. And, you know, dog parks in a lot of ways, when they're very, very small, cause more problems, sometimes with aggressive dogs in a confined space. And so I've seen that quite a bit. And so just want to make sure that there's a rule in place about how many dogs or how it's really buffered from the street and that residential entry. I really do appreciate the setback in terms of widening the street, and so that retail can pour out, as long as that is that happens. And so as long as that happens, I think that could be really lovely with, like, you know, planters that might have annuals and really add color and interest in that corner, and maybe even a piece of art. And so I think activating that corner is really of an utmost importance, as well as how you come out of kind of that underpass, as you just mentioned. If you can do a low line type situation, even with just color and light, I think that would be fantastic. And then finally, there was a couple of views about the roof deck, that there is a community roof deck, but you know, there was no program or what that might look like. And so I would encourage the design team to consider even a small amenity that could be for children of the building. I'm not asking for like a full scale play piece, but something that could, you know, when you are perhaps a single mother that lives in this building, you can take your child there in the winter and kind of let them run around a little bit. I feel like those spaces, especially in our cold winters, are missing. So I would love to see something like that. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. This is Jeff again. Just one thing to point out, and I think we're trying to figure out how to capitalize on this opportunity, is the parkway on Prairie is really deep. It's unusually deep. And I think, to your point about, you know, really kind of personalizing the entry, and I think the color, you know, it's a very good point about it being the color red, the same as the retail. So we'll definitely take that into consideration. But I think that there's some cool opportunity to really do something with that parkway and that kind of unusually deep green space out in front of the residential entry. And, you know, maybe there's some kind of engagement with furniture. I don't know. I think there's a good opportunity there to really kind of, you know, really mark the residential entry in a more humanly scaled way. So that's something we're looking into. And, you know, I think all your points are very well taken. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you, Jeff. I totally agree. If you can kind of utilize the wide parkway, I think that we solve that issue, and I trust your creativity.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Are there any more comments on that? We will now move on to the second item on the agenda. To the applicant team, please clearly state your name and your relation to the project. Prior to speaking, you have roughly 20 minutes to present your proposal. Committee members, please hold your comments and questions until after each presentation. The next agenda item is 8840 to 8854 South Commercial Avenue, also known as Galleria 89 in the 10th Ward. Galleria 89 is a mixed-use project at the corner of South Commercial Avenue and East 89th Street. The 100% affordable housing component will include 58 multifamily units between two buildings, 46 units in the new building, and 12 units in the rehab building. 12 units in the rehab early 20th century building. The project intends to revitalize one corner of an active intersection by restoring its historic mixed-use character. Please proceed with the presentation and state your name prior to speaking. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm AJ Patton, founder of 548 Development. Thank you all for the time here. The 548 Development is the lead developer for this project. Our partner is Syzygy Cities. The CEO is Rachel Voss. Rachel, would you pop and say hello?
Hi, good morning.
And so, yes, this is Galleria 89. 89th and Commercial. This is an Invest Southwest winner. We're really excited to talk about this mixed use, 2 sites, new construction and existing rehab, approximately 58 units that we'll be putting in this development, new coffee shop, potentially a bank branch. And likely at groundbreaking, this will be the largest passive house development in the city of Chicago's history. So we're really proud of the chance to come here and tell the story. I will politely get out of the way for the architects, and most excited that our lead designer for this project, and the winner of the RFP, was Ravetna, led by Cyrus Ravetna. So go ahead, Cyrus.
All right, so I'm going to briefly interject. So for our committee members, we have had one of these Invest Southwest winners, as AJ pointed out, come before. So there's a little bit of backstory to how this all came to be. So under the leadership of Mayor Lightfoot and Commissioner Cox, our Invest Southwest RFPs have the goals of soliciting development proposals for key locations along the corridor, going beyond our traditional process to facilitate design excellence, encouraging the community to identify types of uses and evaluate responses, and encourage local partnerships and build local wealth. So as Josh and AJ said, this is at 89th and Commercial. It is adjacent to the Pilsen Wellness Center, which is operating out of an old police station, and along this very active intersection with Cucula's, Athletico, and La Fruteria, occupying the other 2 corners. So we issued this RFP in November 2020. Then they were due in March. So we went through our evaluation process, which I'll cover in a bit. And right now we're in step 4. So yes, as part of the evaluation process, we did 2 visioning workshops. The first workshop chose a site. The second workshop hammered down the existing uses. During this time, we had outreach with the alderwoman. We reviewed community plans, and we had 2 community roundtables preceding our 2 visioning workshops. So through our feedback, we had 6 semifinalist sites. 87% of respondents chose this corner site for mixed use, and notably there was a desire for some public space that Cyrus Ravetna and Farr Associates have put into this project, which they'll present soon. We were fortunate enough, we got 2 very high quality complete responses to this RFP. Spoiler, Gallery 89 was selected through our evaluation, outreach, and our internal committee, which actually, in addition to city staff, included 3 community evaluators who live in South Chicago. And I would like to thank our design team for letting me interject with that background. I would like to remind them I control the slideshow, so they can let me know when they need me to move on. Thank you all.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Cyrus Ravetna from Ravetna Architects. I was the one who worked with AJ and teamed up with 548 Capital to enter the competition and with the winning entry. If you can switch to the next slide, Michael. So just a little bit of context of where South Chicago is. It's right at, as you know, 89th Street. The slide on the right, or the image on the right, you can see that's Commercial Avenue, which is labeled there. And this building really terminates Commercial Avenue. So we really wanted to create something special that terminates that, that retail corridor. So everything south of that star, the red star that you see there, is the prime retail space. And this building sort of terminates that axis of the retail space. Next slide. Next slide, Michael. So we started with understanding the context of the neighborhood. And to the left are some of the block images. And you'll see those really strong brick retail spaces. This is, and then the other history of the neighborhood, there are currently 9 closed steel plants in South Chicago. One of the largest ones was United Steel, called Southworks. So we really wanted to blend those two ideas of the current block images and masonry with that history of the site being the steel works. So what we ended up with was this building with an existing a masonry base with a steel building coming out from that masonry base. Next slide. It's really a truly diverse neighborhood, and this is one of the murals in that neighborhood. You can see that they celebrate their diversity, and they truly appreciate each other's different cultures and different heritage. Also, there's a streetscape in progress right now that's being implemented. And so it's a very colorful neighborhood and a colorful streetscape. And again, our building terminates that streetscape. So we took that into consideration as well throughout the design. Next slide, Michael. So this was our competition entry, and our ideas were very clear right from the beginning. There's a couple of existing buildings, 2 are non-salvageable, but the one on the right with the yellow brick is the existing building which we chose to restore. Then terminating that corner, or emphasizing that corner, we have our new construction building. And between the two, we've had this very clear concept that we had a plaza between the two buildings. And that plaza has now turned into a courtyard, which becomes the entrance to these 2 buildings. So almost like a courtyard entrance in your traditional Chicago architecture. Next slide. So this is our progression of the design. In the upper left, you see our entry to our response to the RFP. Again, the new construction building, plaza, and the existing building. The overall massing and delineation of the site has remained consistent with those ideas. And we have some community partners in the neighborhood, such as Sky Art, and we really envision that plaza as a place for artwork and for the community to come together to celebrate that through artwork in that plaza. And then, so a couple more iterations of the design, October, November, and then through December, March, and into what you see now in the lower right. Just modifying the massing, and as we understood the massing in the interior of the building more, we also tried to increase the dwelling units to maximize the use of the site. Next. Again, you see the existing building up at the top, our courtyard in between the new building and the existing building. And then our new building is right there in the bottom of the slide. In the back, we have about 10 parking spaces accessible off the alley at surface. And then under the building of the new building, we have about 6 parking spaces. And the red arrows indicate the entrances. And again, some of the main entrances to both of these buildings are through the courtyard. So we envision that as the courtyard entrance to the buildings. Other thing I'll point out is we wanted to really activate this courtyard. So we have a strategic partner on this project who's Dollop Coffee, and they're gonna be leasing the retail space in the ground floor. And they're gonna activate that courtyard with some outdoor seating through some new openings in that existing building's wall. Next slide. So here you can see the Commercial Avenue elevation with the existing building on the right and the new building on the left. And what we really wanted to do here was using those 2 materials of the brick and the steel, which I mentioned before, we wanted to sort of bring the scale of this building down. It's a 5-story building, and the majority of the street are 2- and 3-story buildings. So we wanted to use the brick as a way to bring the scale down and reference the adjacent buildings. But at the corner, we raised the brick to emphasize that corner and to really terminate that retail street. And again, here you can see our idea of the brick base with the metal building emerging from behind that brick building. Next slide.
I just want to reiterate, we're about halfway through the 20-minute allotment. Thanks.
Okay. Next slide. So existing conditions of the existing building. There's some really great existing interior brick walls, and that gives us an opportunity to expose those and still retain our insulation on the exterior walls. Next. Ground floor plan with the retail in the front. Again, there's a lot of opportunities to expose the brick walls, and you can see the courtyard entrance in the blue there. We have placed 2 apartments in the rear of that first floor, and we wanted to make those really special apartments so that those apartments have almost 14-foot high ceilings. They will have some exposed brick and some exposed columns, cast iron columns. Next. Again, our typical second and third floor with the alternating yellows. There's 5 units per floor, which all comply to the DOH and IDA requirements. This building is directly on the property line on the north, and therefore we didn't have the opportunity to capture our light and vent on that north property line. So we pushed all of our services, staircase and elevators to that north. So we capture all our light and vent from the front, courtyard, and rear elevation. And amenities in the lower level of this building include the tenant storage and bike parking for the entire complex. Next. So the front elevation, we see this as a restoration, and you'll see those really fantastic existing steel lintels, the horizontal lintels. We really wanted to emphasize those. So we put that clear story transom glass above that and some steel details below that, again, to reference the steel and the history of this neighborhood. But in general, we see this as a restoration of that existing building facade. Next. Next slide, Michael. And this is our courtyard elevation. Again, we see it as an art plaza with these new openings. The artwork is strategically located towards the front of the plaza, so it's visible from the street. And next. Next slide. And then so we've teamed up with Farr & Associates, and they've taken our original design and concept design, and they are working as our architect of record to get this building constructed. And I'll introduce Doug.
Thank you, Cyrus. Thank you, AJ. Good afternoon, Doug Farr Associates. We're the architects of record and delighted to be collaborating with Cyrus and the team. So next slide, Michael. When we took over, we had sort of marching orders. These are those. Make sure the thing is buildable. It was really strong sculpture, and we wanted to make it into a kind of a buildable building. We wanted to increase the rentable retail area and the unit counts. We have an ambitious sustainability agenda, all electric building and FIA certified building. And to AJ said, we believe we will be the largest such building in the city at the time we are opened. And then finally, to bring down construction costs. So you'll see a lot of refinement, and it's serving these masters. Next slide, please. So here's our progression since we really sort of kicked off in December, and you can see we're refining based on the kind of design launch that Cyrus, the strong design launch that he gave us. And over that time, we've increased the unit count, all of us, from 52 to 58 units, which goes to the bottom line and makes the developer very happy. So, and the city very happy too. So next slide, please.
We have about 5 minutes left. Thanks.
Thank you. So these are, Michael, this will be 3 slides. If you can give them each about 12 seconds. This is the view from the at the corner view of the new building, the slice of the courtyard. Next slide, we'll just rotate around. This is a corner view from across the intersection of the building, and you can see there's the 2 vocabularies, the lower brick and the metal coming out of it is Cyrus's original vision. Next slide is kind of the alley view that picks up the existing academy next door. You can see that our brick sort of steps down to reflect the context and height of the existing masonry. Next slide, please. And this is how we're going to build it, and do so with FIA certification in mind. We are proposing to build a more or less a freestanding masonry facade in front of the metal facade above. So we can talk about that in the Q&A if anybody has questions, but we've given it a lot of thought. We're ready to build it. Next slide. So here's the final selections have not been made, but we're looking at a kind of blended brick palette below, and then an aluminum panel with strong reveals above. Next slide. And so 5 floor plans, 6 plans. So Michael, if you can give them each about 10 seconds, that'd be great. This one, actually, don't change yet. The pink, the salmon is the retail. It wraps around, as AJ referenced. We're hoping to attract bank, and Syzygy is working on that. The 2 yellow boxes are, we have 2 ground floor residential units, 1 bedrooms, and then the purple is a community room that's accessible right off the lobby. And then the gray is kind of back of house and support. Next slide. Second floor, it's a U-shaped plan with a U-shaped hallway. And you'll see how everything stacks, all the plumbing stacks, even though the building sets back. Next slide. Third floor is the same as the second floor. Next slide, please. Fourth floor steps back. The 2 sort of paws of the Sphinx step back, and then the 5th floor, the right paw pulls back even more. And so you'll see that in a minute in the section. Next slide, please. A roof plan. We've cleared the roof as much as we can for solar photovoltaic panels to generate a good share of the building's electricity. The gray box is a placeholder for the mechanical penthouse, and through innovations in mechanical design, we may not have a mechanical penthouse. So wish us luck on that. Next. Here's the 4 elevations, and again, 10 seconds a piece. Michael, if you could just sort of cycle through. This is the south elevation with the brick and aluminum massing. Very much, in a good place, but refining as we go forward. So we're eager if anyone has thoughts on how those refinements might take place. This is the east elevation, the Commercial Avenue side. You can see the building steps, the masonry steps down to guide your eye towards the courtyard and the building entrance. Next slide, please. This is the courtyard facade, and you can see the aluminum, the brick sort of peels away and pauses right at the entrance, so that aluminum is the marker that you're welcome to enter here. Next slide is the alley facade, and again, we're stepping the masonry to reflect the context. And you can see the shadow lines of the 6 tuck-under parking spaces and the dumpster unloading zone. Next slide. So here's a section. We're excited about this. This is that sort of prominent corner that has 3 steps to it, which is really important for delivering daylight into the plaza, which is on the north side of a 5-story building. We have sun studies. We'll show you those in a minute. Something we're very proud of and excited about is the lobby that leads to an active use stairs. So here's that lobby view. We're daylighting the stairwell. We are using hold open doors in a creative code breaking way. Sorry, City of Chicago, we hope we can get this passed. To make the stair really inviting, to draw you to take the stairs rather than the elevator, and a very kind of market rate amenity aesthetic in the lobby. Next slide. So sustainable design and FIAS. We could go on for days, we won't. Just say there's 3 primary challenges. One is to optimize the windows. This slide shows you the blue bar chart there. You can see half of our energy loss pretty much in the winter is due to windows. So we've got to optimize the windows. The balconies we have are inset. We need them to be thermally broken. And then finally, we need to achieve our FIA certification, we need an R25 effective wall insulation, which is not rated. So we can, maybe people have questions about that, but just trust me, it's tough to do. Next slide.
Please take 1 minute to wrap up your presentation. Thank you.
Love to. So the benefits of this, 40% lower utility bills for tenants, and then we hope to reduce asthma rates because we will not be cooking with gas. Next slide. So 3 quick slides. This is kind of refined facade studies we're doing. We started with a south elevation at 44% glass. Click through the next 2. Through studies, we got it down to 39. Then next slide to 33. We think we're hovering around 30%. Those refinements are ongoing. Next slide, please. And I'm going to take the liberty of describing the work of Omni. Ecosystems, they're on the line. And so if you have questions, please pose those. Next slide. Here's our sun studies of the courtyard. You can see the sort of sample plan on the left. And then these are June, July, May, August, April, and March, September across. And what you see, we were sort of delighted to see 5 months of the year, the plaza is more than half in sun all the time. And then even in the March, September cycle, there is some sun hitting the ground, and the entire south facade of the existing building that Cyrus illustrated with renderings will be in full sunlight. So it'll be a sunny plaza 7 months of the year. Very excited about that. Next slide. The context, the streets are all chewed up, and Omni has plans to upgrade those. Next slide. We're excited to start with precedent images. Paley Park in New York, a kind of a terraced performance space in the upper right, string lights in the lower left, and that promenade with trees in the lower right. Next slide. They ran through a series of studies, different approaches to how the space would be organized, how the vegetation would respond to the half-shaded situation. So they're confident through limbing up trees and plant selection with shade-loving species, we're good. Next slide, please. Here's the preferred plan, an outlay of trees in the recess, and you can see the texture of the courtyard spilling out onto the public way. Next slide. Zoom in, and then we have a rear area. There's a kind of wall at the back where the word stage, just to the left of the word stage, there's a wall that kind of screens the alley from the front of the site. Next slide. You'll see it better in the rendering. There we go. So here's the rendering of our preferred scheme, a textured walk surface that leads to the two lobby entrances, mobile seating on the two sides, string lights to give it a kind of outdoor ceiling year round, and then a back wall that we're still debating, that could be vegetated, could be artful, and in the foreground just before that, some sort of tiered seating area. Next slide. Thank you.
There you go.
Great, thank you so much. All right, committee members, please take a moment to review any comments received from the public in the Q&A box and incorporate them however you see fit. It does not look like that we have any comments. So the floor is now yours for comments and questions to the applicant. Again, please raise your Zoom hand and we will call on you. And it looks like Ann Thompson is first. Thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to congratulate you on the use of the courtyard. I love that as a part of this project, and think it'll be a real value add for the residents who live there as well as the community. I did have one question about on the new building. At the top of the building, there seems to be a story of metal panels that has no fenestration. I'm wondering what's driving sort of a hard or a large top to the building like that without windows.
And
it makes it feel a little bit top heavy.
Yeah, and thank you, Doug Farr. Appreciate the comment. And so what's going on there is to meet our FIAS goals, we need to provide energy recovery ventilation to and from each unit. The mechanical engineer's current recommendation is to make our top 5th floor 3 feet taller to do all the horizontal duct distribution up at that level. But we agree, it's got a really tall forehead, and in the next round of refinement, we're looking at ways to kind of tackle that, because it finishes too tall, the proportions aren't right. We see the same thing you see.
I think if you're able to solve that, like there's some really nice things in regard to scale happening with the building that are really great that we haven't seen in other projects, with that one exception. And again, I really congratulate you on the use of public art. We tend to see a lot of tend to see art incorporated in buildings. And I think the way, I don't know, some of the earlier images where you have the public art on the floor of the courtyard, on the wall of the courtyard, I think starts to get me excited about what could happen there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Michael, can you please pull up the presentation so we can have some visuals?
Understood. I just sent you a question in a Teams chat about that. Give me 1 second to just make sure I quit Teams so it doesn't pop up while I'm sharing the screen.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I believe, Sarah, you are next.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, actually, Anne kind of already mentioned my main comment, which is the top of the building does appear really heavy and there's a lack of activity on the facade. And in addition to that, the penthouse or the mechanical penthouse is over top of that. So what I would encourage you to explore, if you're able to, is to figure out exactly where these ducts are running and see if you can even look at depressing some of the mechanical penthouse, which is another 12 feet above the already tall looking 15-foot last floor. And it does make sense with a residential unit. I couldn't imagine a residential unit would need 15 feet, but I understand if there's ductwork and things above, that makes more sense as an appropriate height for a top unit. The other question I had was if you could explain a little bit between the previous presentations where you had a different material palette and then what caused you to change to the current material palette with the brick and the kind of light metal paneling versus what was originally proposed, and also why the archway was removed from the courtyard or the gateway piece.
Are you talking about the material palette from the original submission?
Right. Yeah. There were just images in our materials that we received from the original submission, and I was curious if there was an evolution of why you landed where you landed on the material palette.
Sure. Well, I think we've been pretty clear from the beginning of brick and metal. And so that's been pretty consistent. In terms of the metal panels, we really wanted something that celebrated when people think of steel town steel, they sort of think of aluminum and those sort of materials. So that's really where we landed on with those, with the metal panels up there. The brick, in terms of the color of the brick, we really wanted it to be contextual to the site. And this is a great example right here. You can see the adjacent police station, which is now Pilsen Wellness Center. It's a brick that sort of speaks with the adjacent buildings and isn't a drastic departure from the existing context of the neighborhood. So we did want to retain that context of the neighborhood. And what was your second question?
Just in the earlier images of the courtyard, there was actually an architectural piece in the front that kind of announced the courtyard, and it seems like that is gone and the buildings don't have a physical connection, but the courtyard landscape, I suppose, will be what connects them. But there's not a rendering of the courtyard yet, which I understand you're still developing, and I think seeing that all together with the landscape would be beneficial to understand what the courtyard looks like now.
Yeah. That piece was eliminated, a little bit of value engineering here and there. And also we felt like it was sort of limiting your visibility of the artwork in the murals into the courtyard. So we decided to sort of provide the signage on the side of the building instead for the courtyard, rather than have that overhead piece, which just tended to limit the visibility of the courtyard, which is such an important space for the public.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I believe, Ronald, you have the next question.
No, thanks, Josh, and design team. Thanks so much for a thoughtful presentation. Certainly, 20 minutes is probably not enough with all the litany of good ideas that you've explored over the last several months to actually get all of that in. Here really quickly, so I leave time for the balance of committee members to weigh in. One thought that I had regarding the courtyard entry sequence. On the one hand, certainly, in keeping with the tradition of Chicago, courtyard entries, and I think that once developed will be a very exciting, and serene space and experience. On the other hand, encouraging you to think about it from a line of sight, eyes on the street safety, perspective. Courtyard buildings, and their approaches, particularly on the south side, there are concerns about personal safety, depending on how well lit they are, what type of line of sight you have from above. And so again, I know it's very much still being developed, and I like the ideas, the litany of ideas that's being explored, but I would encourage you to keep that in mind, as you proceed.
Yeah. So we do lots of work on the south side of Chicago. Almost 80% of our work is on the south side. So this is a, you know, we know the south side neighborhoods and communities very well. And security has been a prime concern of ours for that courtyard space, absolutely. And so that's in one of our top priorities is to make that courtyard a safe and inviting space without prohibiting access to it. So I appreciate the comment, and it is relevant to this neighborhood because there are special concerns in certain neighborhoods. And we are absolutely at forefront of our design is security for that courtyard space. And this site actually slopes, the street level is about 6 feet higher than the alley level. So there's some interesting and challenging things that come up with those differences. And the courtyard has been a challenge because of those height differences and because of the security issues that we're trying to resolve. So we're balancing that security and the visibility into it and so forth.
Oh, thank you.
I believe, Juan, you're next.
Great, thanks, Josh. And first and foremost, congratulations on winning to all of you, because we know that's no small feat. So congrats to the entire team on that. It's similar to a previous comment. It's interesting when we look at the competition submittal and even just the character and quality of the images. I understand designs change, but there was in those images of the competition, they just feel like there's a different kind of quality in what we're seeing. And even I think it parallels more of what you guys were describing in the context of like things like a colorful streetscape and life, because when we get to the images that we're seeing now, what's interesting to me is that even when we look at the courtyard, I understand that design is in flux, but that courtyard is so integral into what you're doing. And it is this connective tissue between the old building and the new building. But when it's absent from the renderings, it's hard to understand how it's playing a role in everything that's being designed. It's almost like, you know, and I understand you had the Omni presentation at the end of this, but when we're looking at images that are absent of that feeling, just like we can look at the image on the right side, that's just basically a brick ground. I know you were exploring it, but I think it's strange to see it absent of the design process, even at this level. The other part of that, and Josh, if you can, you know, flip through a couple of images of the renderings, especially from the other side. You know, when we look at these, and part of it is, it just feels like this building is landed. And it's absent of what you guys are thinking about for the landscape. In particular on the side where the cars park practically parallel, that sidewalk gets pretty narrow, and your landscape plan shows that you're going to have grades and trees. All that plays a role in the design of the building. And I feel like in the competition entry, you could just see more of a level of care in what was being put together compared to this. And again, please, design team, understand that I know things are in flux, but I also think it's important that these design conversations run parallel even with the building design. And then lastly, I do think, similar to the previous project that we just saw, they are housing projects, and I think we need to think about the sense of entry. And it's very difficult to understand where the entry is, other than we know it comes off the courtyard, but it's difficult to see how that kind of procession is celebrated. And then in the solar studies, I think you guys have shown some timely views of when the sun hits, but I sincerely doubt you're going to get as much sun as you're suggesting. And I think in one of the packets we received before today, the solar studies showed that the shade does dominate that space quite a bit. So I just think even in these studies, this should play a role in the way that you're articulating that courtyard. So it's a lot to say, but again, I do want to go back to the aspect of you guys winning competition and doing something so wonderful for the community. Thanks.
Thanks, Juan.
All right.
Looks like the whole area
Thank you.
is,
I believe Hannah, you're next, and then after Hannah is Reed.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I am very excited to hear about all of the sustainable measures that, FAR, you always put into your projects. It is refreshing to see. And then I am happy to see kind of the Omni presentation towards the end, because it's not often that we actually get a schematic design of the landscape. So I'm appreciative of even the beginnings of that. A few questions. This courtyard is about 30 feet wide. Paley Park, as you have shown, is about 40. It feels much bigger because of kind of the scale of the buildings, as well as how they have programmed it, as well as kind of these movable tables and chairs. What I am concerned about on this site is that because it's not New York's in the middle of New York City, and we would very much know if people were walking away with movable tables and chairs on that site, I have a good feeling that any kind of furnishings in this project will not be movable. And so I think that gives it a very, very different character. Whether it is movable and they get put in and out all of the time, that is a maintenance concern. There are tables and chairs being shown on this kind of the sidewalk parkway side. That's another item that I highly question that if that would happen. If it does happen and it spills out really on the street, I think that would be very exciting. And so I do have a lot of questions about how this kind of plaza will be used, how often it will be programmed. I feel like a lot of times we have these great ambitions that these courtyard spaces are going to be programmed all the time, but when it has tents and there's a farmer's market and there's a lot of activity, it's very exciting. But I think we need to figure out, what does it look like in the off seasons, in the winter time? Does it become a dog park? Does it allow children to play for, again, the residents of the building? Is it safe? I think that is a very valid question. And then I also question, the viability of these trees on this site at the sizes that you're showing. And so if you can maybe talk a little bit more about the sustainable features you have in the courtyard, as well as how you plan on getting large trees like what you're showing to grow on that site in the small tree pits that you're showing, that would be helpful.
So this is Adam with Omni. Hello, everybody. These were our process sketches I had from obviously a little bit earlier on. And if we go to the renderings at the end, the next couple of slides, you'll see we've thought through this process. So the wall in the back was pushed forward due to alignment with windows in the units and stuff with the architecture of the building. So the landscape on the left side is actually outside of the courtyard space. So you see where the stage would be up against the back wall. The entrances to the buildings are towards the back of the space. We know that one of the retail spaces is the cafe, coffee shop. So activating the front of that plaza with the seating, scattering it through the space, and then also trying to pull it to the into the right of way. We did discuss having mounted site furnishing versus movable. That is a programming and maintenance concern that we have discussed and don't know the answers yet to exactly. We also have to deal with stormwater. So the thought of some of the pavement in the space would potentially be permeable pavers, a way to have stormwater management underneath this plaza as part of the programming. And then it was to capture the art in the space, is there art on the back brick wall that's like around the stage, and having this, we call it a stage, but it's just more of an open court for the entrances to where that space can be activated if it wanted to be. And you also said safety. Yes, safety has been something that's been discussed in every single meeting. And I think our earlier concepts had much more landscape. And so then with that safety concern or thought, we decided to open it up a little bit more, have more of the larger limbed up shade trees in there. So you could see under the canopies, of course, and then being able to provide that overhead lighting to bring down the ceiling and make it feel like a more safe space. And also maintenance we know is a concern. So, understanding long-term, if there's a planting bed, it's not going to just become, a mud pit when it's not maintained, and knowing that it's a really shady, for the most part, shady plaza space that, our palette of plants is a little more limited in a shade garden, even though shade gardens are quite beautiful. It takes a little bit more to maintain. Did that kind of answer your question, Anna?
I think so. I think if we are calling it an art plaza, I think that it needs to have more art than just the backdrop of the thing. And so I would highly encourage you to think about how art gets incorporated even more in the space.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Anna, you had asked about the activation of the site, and the Dollop Coffee will have outdoor seating there. And that's intentional to sort of activate that courtyard a little bit more than just the residents, to bring a little bit more life to that courtyard.
That's a very good point.
All right. Given our time constraints, we'll just have two more commenters. So we'll have Reed and then we'll have Brian. Thank you.
Josh, can you jump back to the picture that shows the development of the elevation? We were looking at it a little bit before, the sort of historic, the earlier versions and the later versions. It's just.
Right.
There we go.
Michael is
there we go. That's the one.
Michael is in control of the PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was you. I'm sorry. This is fine. First of all, I too would like to congratulate everybody. These are tough projects on very tight budgets, and you guys are trying to squeeze an awful lot out of this, and so just keep squeezing. I just have I have some of the same questions and concerns, but I'm going to jump to something new now. I'm curious as if you look at December 2021, all on the bottom row here, to March 2nd and then to March 9th, with each iteration, your brick portion of the building grows ever more historically, it starts to look ever more kind of like it's repeating historic tropes. We go from something abstract to something with lintels, and then we go from something with lintels to something with lintels and crossbars and further and further away from the abstraction of everything that's on top of it. And I wonder, does it need to be that literal in its kind of reference to the historic character? And then the second question I had was the dark brick, the reddish color brick, when it seemed like on the outside corner where we saw before, everything around it is tan. Now, I may just not know the neighborhood and there may be lots of red brick nearby. But when you're talking about immediate proximal context, that just raises questions. So I wanted to ask those two questions.
Okay. Yeah. So Doug, you take the first one. I'll take his. What's my man's name? Reed. Reed. This is AJ. So the color, where we landed on the color, that's a lot of that's community input. We had a lot of conversations with some of the community groups and with the alderman and her team. And candidly, this was one of my favorites on where we landed on this particular color. Doug, you can take the questions about the kind of the other pieces of it.
Yeah. So hey, Reed, Doug.
Hey, Doug.
the red kind of came out of the community process. I think we felt like to change it, we would have to go back to the community and ask those questions. So that's number one. But on as to your point about the sort of abstract masonry grid becomes a much more aspiring to look like a building that was there before. You've caught us in the kind of swing of studies. We had a meeting with Melvin last week, and he was sort of posing to us a premise that says there's one reading of this two vocabulary building that says you inherited an existing building on the site and then you built on top of it. And so he was also really strong, I think, on kind of the durability and maintenance of the building and detailing and so on. So you see a swing of hemlines in favor of expressed lintels, expressed sills, expressed heads, all with the specific goal of getting water off from sheet draining down the masonry facade. So, but I think when we printed today and looked at it, we have a lot of things that we want to pursue and mark up. So we agree with you. I was excited when Cyrus generated the schemes about where the brick was very abstract. And so, I think we probably have gone too far in one direction. We could see if we can pull it back and get back there.
That's great. I'd strongly encourage you to do that just because you've gone so far with the other language, with the metal clad building and this notion of reconciling the kind of industrial heritage and the architectural heritage is one that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me anyway. But the further you go on that, you didn't actually inherit an older building. You got it's a brand new ground up building. So you can do whatever you want in it. And there are lots of other ways to deal with the rain and the natural kind of deterioration, which you could do just with not expressing a lintel in a different color or a different material, just using brick detailing. So there are lots of ways I'd encourage you to do that, because that first image on the left and the one on the upper left, the March 2021, they're at least much more logical for what you're describing your intention is with the building. The color, neighborhoods aren't always right. But if that's where you want to go, I think then all the more reason to try and emphasize what you're doing in their upper left-hand corner, rather than moving to the lower right-hand corner. But again, I too want to congratulate everybody at the end of the day. These are tough projects, and you're making a lot of the right moves. We're talking to you a lot about refinement here rather than real serious problems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I believe, Brian, you'll be our last commenter.
Okay, thank you. I agree that the project appears to be really well planned. All the comments about the courtyard, I think the development team should take to heart. And that includes the supporting areas of the ground floor plan, community room, how does it work with the lobby space? So it's just not a forgotten leftover room, but really is part of that entry sequence. And I love the idea. I didn't see it before, but I love the idea of the open stair or active stair that, facilitates, people moving up and down and really becoming part of a community. But I do want to just maybe tag on to Reed's comments about the exterior. And part of it is a question, was the stepping massing and the idea that you had a base and this top, which I think is a little different from your initial RFP scheme. Was it initiated by the planning department or was it initiated by the designers? Because I just see that, this is the issue of people say, oh, you need to break down the scale and it needs to be more about the neighborhoods. And there is a certain kind of confusion in terms of materiality. And you could say, well, maybe there's a dialogue between old and new, but then it's not old and new, as Reed mentioned, or about solid or heaviness, gravity and lightness. So, I think that is part of architecture, the art of architecture in terms of how do you describe and articulate a building in all its not only form, fenestration, but also materiality that kind of makes sense and has a timeless quality and not just having to kowtow to, some perceived concerns by either the planning department or neighborhoods. So, part of it, my comment is to you guys that developers should support the architects and also push the contractors and cost estimators to allow the designers to really explore some innovative materials or kind of techniques or ideas so that you do have, if you want to have this two-part building, what is the right sort of expression of the pieces? Because I just see that, these are ideas that feel slightly thin to me and they're just very decorative. Just one last couple of the comments. Artwork, a good comment about the artwork. I mean, it actually helps to identify artists early so that you could be in collaboration with them so that you don't just say there's a, there's a 10 square foot or 10 by 10 panel, 100 square foot panel on the wall that you need to paint a mural on. But maybe, as you engage some local artists, there might be something quite creative about that. And then finally, the passive house goals are, really positive. And I encourage you guys to do everything you can to pursue that, including the thermally broken slabs, which hardly anybody does. But it'd be great if you guys can do that. Thank you.
Brian, thank you for that. This is AJ. You said a couple things there. I think one, Rachel and I have a couple of folks in tow who will be working with us collaboratively on the art side, and we're passionate about that particular mural, both not just on the side, but in the back wall on the courtyard. We're 100% committed to the passive house. We've already hired multiple consultants. That's why we brought Doug in. And I think your opening comment is probably the most fair. There is a kind of a push-pull about how far do we want to go with the kind of artistic expression versus what has been historically done, contrast with costs associated with such. I do think it's fair to challenge the development team on how much we pushed and pulled the architects to stick to the initial design that Cyrus outlined. I think we've stuck to the spirit of what we brought to the RFP, while also realizing that we wanted to accomplish the sustainability goals that I candidly care a lot about. And so, can we reach those goals with that amount of setbacks? Essentially having 10 different roofs and so forth. There was some give back that we had to get there, but I thought they also pulled back, relatively fair to say, hey, in order to get there, AJ, we need to stay somewhere in this middle ground. And I thought that was it almost sounded like you were at some of our meetings in terms of what that push and pull looked like over the last 6 months. So no, it's very, very fair comments, and we'll take those back.
And Brian, this is Doug. Thank you. And I'm going to respond to two different things. One is on the FIAS stuff and the thermally broken slabs. We agree it is rare that people are able to sell that. They get beat out all day. We've worked really hard to minimize the amount that we need. So we're going in with our eyes open with this one. We've been conducting integrated design sessions with the mechanical engineering team since November to get, and the GC is also at the table. So we are making real decisions in real time, tracking the costs as we go. And so this will be a powerful case study, including on energy performance, but on cost performance. So we're making decisions. That one's more, that one's less. What's the trade-off? All of that. And then I took from yours a kind of spirit of defiance to say, hey, we're building this. It's going to last a long time, and let's pursue the kind of pure vision. I mean, all of the questions and comments were, to me, contributing to a keep at it team, and I thank you for that, because I think this, we all know the big presentation compels everybody to sober up and get your stuff on the page, and then you finally get to see it. Like, oh boy, I'd like to tweak a couple things there. So these were great comments. Really excited about the next stage. Thank you all.
Great. I believe if there are no other comments, we will, give me 1 second, sorry. So All right, we're about to adjourn. So on behalf of DPD, thank you again for all of your critical thinking and thoughtful comments on these two important projects. The meeting will now move into a private session to allow committee members to further advise the commissioner and his staff. We will take a 10-minute recess and reconvene at 3:10 p.m. Members of the public and development teams, please depart the Zoom meeting by that time. Thank you all for attending and sharing your thoughts. We hope you'll come